very much for coming along today. This is a trade union meeting organised by all the local government trade unions, supported by Clydebank Trades Council and the People's Assembly. And the subject of today's meeting is the Tories trade union bill. So we titled it "Kill the Bill" because that's what we tend to do with it. So I think a very healthy lineup of speakers, a mixture of local speakers and national speakers at Scottish level. You should find on your seat we've got a motion which we've asked to pass, and we tend to deliver this on to the press, the local press in the area, and also take it to our elected representatives on the council. You'll see the lineup we've got. Well, first up we'll have Jackson Cullinane, Jackson's political officer Unite. Then we'll have Lynn Henderson, and Lynn is Scottish Secretary of PCS, and she's speaking in the capacity of the People's Assembly today. And then we'll have Dave Watson, and Dave, the Deputy General Secretary of the STUC. And following that we'll have a break. Later on we'll have there's a number of other speakers, but I want to mention we have Martin Looney, leader of the council, Western Berkshire Council, because you might be aware that along with COSLA, a whole number of councils, including Western Berkshire, have passed a motion of non-compliance with this Tory policy. So also there's a contact list there, because clearly we want to get as many contacts as we can. So if you're a trade unionist or you're a community activist, you're very welcome to sign this list here, and if you want, just pass them up at the end of the meeting. We've also got stalls here from Unison and the Morning Star and the Scottish Pencil Association, and we've got Robert there from the latter who will say a few words on his organisation. I should introduce myself. My name is Tom Morrison. I'm chair actually of the Western Berkshire Unison branch, the secretary sitting up at the back there, gave a right smile there. So with your permission I'll chair the meeting. We're having it filmed, so if anybody objects to that, then we'll cut you out. But this will appear on Clydebank Trades Council website and also People's Assembly if you want to have a look at it later on. And clearly any of the trade unions are welcome to stick it on their website also. So enough from me. First speaker, as I said, is Jackson. Jackson's considered one of the thinkers of the Scottish trade union movement, and he's also got something interesting to say. So leave it to Jackson.
Great. Thanks, Tory. Chair, I don't intend to go into too much to the detail or the fine detail of what this bill proposes. What I intend to do is simply talk about why it's happening, what its primary aim and objectives are, and how we can resist that. So in essence, what is this bill all about? But before I do that, I just want to make some comment about what it's not about, because there is messages coming out from the Tory government which seeks to explain their position, principally through the pages of their friends in the right-wing media. They argue, for example, that thresholds, limits on turnouts and trade union ballots, etc., are required because they present the image that somehow there's a small, in inverted commas, wrecking minority who wish to take industrial action at the drop of a hat and without the mandate of the majority of the workforce. Well, the reality is that if they were really worried about the lack of participation in trade union ballots, then they would be opening themselves up to the suggestions that's been consistently made by unions in recent years, that we should have the right to use modern methods of balloting, including the electronic methods, in order to maximise participation of members. The Tories tell us that we can't get that because they say they are worried about the security of such ballots. And that's the first area of hypocrisy, and there's a lot of that involved here. because the Tories themselves use that type of balloting when they pick candidates, and indeed they've just completed that method when picking their candidate for the London mayor elections. They would also, of course, if they were serious about increasing participation, they would take on board the fact that workplace ballots are always of a higher turnout than any other kind of ballot. The ballots that are held by the CAC when unions go for a recognition position at the workplace are consistently recording turnouts in excess of 80%, some of them as high as 98%. And in all the years that the ballots have been running, there has only ever been 3 complaints made to the certification officer, and none of those complaints were upheld. So there is a proven method of democracy in terms of how trade unions arrive at their decisions, and it's one that's found to be absolutely secure, and one that meets all the requirements of the members and indeed of society generally in terms of the democratic principles. They also tell us, of course, that they should do away with check-off in the public sector, and they're presenting that in the pages of the media as if this is somehow a cost burden on the public sector, that time and money and effort is being spent in order to ensure that trade unions get that kind of facility. The reality is that trade unions pay for that facility. We pay, for example, local authorities for the right to have check-off and union dues deducted from our wages, and in fact, in some local authorities, we have been asked recently to increase the amount of money that we pay for that service. They also, in terms of the cost argument, point the finger at trade union facility time and suggest that that is also a burden on business or a burden on the public purse. Again, the reality is that even the CBI acknowledges that facility time saves massive amount of money for the public sector and for business generally, because when you have active trade union reps on the ground, then they can get a resolution for the employer without the need for legal cases, and costly and prolonged cases at that, or indeed in terms of health and safety incidents, then they can act to improve health and safety and try and reduce the amount of workplace injury. And in terms of that issue about workplace injury, underpinning all of this, in terms of the arguments that the Tories put out, is this myth that somehow we have a strike problem within the UK. The reality is that according to the Office for National Statistics, there was only 2% of the UK people who were involved in any form of industrial action last year. And in terms of the number of days lost through industrial action, it has been declining for many, many years, and is now utterly dwarfed by the 4.1 million days lost through industrial injuries, and indeed the 11 million days lost through stress and depression of people signing off in terms of the workplace. So if they were really serious about challenging days lost to industry, then they would be increasing facility time, particularly for health and safety reps, and not attacking it. So the whole Tory argument for all this is a smokescreen that is designed to divert attention away from what their real purpose and their real reason for doing this is. So what is the real reason? Well, there's loads of people who say that this is unfinished business, that they are driven by the Thatcherite agenda. She attacked trade unions in a big way, but didn't finish the job, and they're picking up where Thatcher left off. That this is purely a vindictive attack on the trade union movement, and is based on their support for Thatcher's philosophy. Well, that's correct. It is true to say that. But this is more than just being based on that particular outlook. They also have firm practical objectives. If you strip the whole thing away, then basically what you come down to is the fact that the Tories represent the interests of capital and trade unions represent the interest of labour. The Tories want to maximise capital and profit, and the trade unions want a share of that profit for those who produce the wealth. So there's an absolute conflict right at the start of this. And the Tories have embarked on an austerity programme which is not necessary, which isn't driven by a need to reduce debt in terms of the economy. It is a political project that is designed to drive down the wages and terms and conditions of workers across the economy and maximise the profits for those who they are in favour of and who they represent. So, when they drive down people's benefits, when they demonise the unemployed, when they create unemployment, when they force people who are on benefit into work, irrespective of what the terms and conditions are, then what they're doing is acting to make sure that there's a form of discipline on people who are in work to limit their demand for increased terms and conditions. Because we've all been there, we've all sat with employers in the past, particularly during that horrible Thatcher period, and been told, well, if you don't like it, there's 3 million people out there who will gladly do it for less. And that is what austerity is all about. It's about driving down the terms and conditions and standing of the entire working class. The trade unions represent an effective block on that, and therefore the trade unions have to be attacked. The trade unions, of course, can also lead that anti-austerity protest. And that's why there are aspects of this bill that attack basic human rights and attack the basic right to protest itself. That's why they want to interfere with the use of social media by trade unions in industrial disputes. That's why they want to identify, through armbands and the rest of it, the instigators of the fight back. And that's why they are attacking the basic human right to withdraw your labour. Now, I know I've said this consistently and people might get fed up with me using the quote, but the right to withdraw your labour is the basic fundamental difference between being a worker and being a slave. That is what the right to withdraw your labour is. So how do we fight back against this? Well, there needs to be, in my view, 3 prongs to this. It needs to be fought against legally, it needs to be fought against politically, and it needs to be fought against industrially. In terms of legally, there is clearly a breach of human rights taking place here. And our union certainly has our lawyers looking at how can we bring forward cases in terms of human right law that opposes this. There is also, of course, contract law. So let's take the position in terms of you work for a local authority, and that local authority deducts money from your wages to pay for your trade union membership. That is a contract between you and your employer. Your employer cannot deduct that money without your mandate to so do. So you have entered into that contract and that relationship. And we'll certainly be looking at, if this bill goes through, in the short term, what we've had to do is stop it going through, obviously, but if it does proceed, then we're looking at, can we gather up strong cases for individual trade union members based on that fundamental breach of contract law? That what the government has done is enter into a position which breaches that contract relationship. So there are legal routes that can be followed here. Politically, what we need to do, what we are doing, is building the strongest possible coalition of forces against this bill. The SNP MPs at Westminster have firmly declared that they oppose the bill. and the Scottish Labour Party conference last week picked the Union Bill as one of its 4 priorities to debate, and overwhelmingly, almost unanimously actually, came out not just in opposition to the bill, but in favour of Labour councillors refusing to implement it. Before they even got to Perth, of course, we had like 12 local authorities who have taken that position. They involve Labour-controlled authorities, but they also now involve the SNP-controlled authority in North Ayrshire. They involve Edinburgh City Council, where the ruling council is Labour and of the SNP, and it even now involves the Highlands Council, which is run by independents and is not renowned for taking particularly radical stances. So this is spreading across local government, and of course we have COSLA, the governing body, issuing statements that they would intend to continue with arrangements such as check-off facility time. Those councils who have came out against the bill and who are saying they will not comply with the changes on facility time and check-off are also in the main saying that they will not use employment agency staff to replace workers in a case of industrial action. There's a second stage to this, of course, and the second stage is that those local authorities, if this bill was passed, just simply say they don't intend to implement it, full stop. Because employment law can only be used against the trade union movement when employers decide to use it. If there's a question mark about whether we've breached laws in pickets, whether we've breached laws in balloting, whether we haven't contacted all the members and involved the members that we should have had, then those laws are triggered by the employer taking the trade union into a court to challenge that. So local government could say and should say that if this law is passed, we will never use it. We will never trigger those type of legal cases. What also needs to happen is that it needs to spread beyond local government. The Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government, who have workers employed by them, should take a similar position of refusing to comply with this law. People who are on health boards should be arguing that the National Health Service, that prides itself on its relationship with its workforce, that is held up by the Scottish Government in particular as a model of employee involvement, should be refusing to implement this bill. And there's employers in the private sector, I wouldn't hold my breath for a whole swathe of them, but there's employers in the private sector who should also be saying that they enjoy a relationship with the trade unions that allows them to solve industrial problems, and that this bill is cutting across that relationship. Because they need to realise that when we get onto the industrial struggle, then what this bill is going to do, far from reducing the amount of industrial action, will inevitably increase the amount of industrial action. Because the reality is, as I said earlier, it's a basic human right for people to withdraw their labour. Workers will be faced, if this law passes, with a basic stark decision to make. And that is that they either breach the law or they suffer the proposals that's been made for their employer to cut their terms and conditions, drive them down in the way that the Tories and their austerity agenda wants them to be driven down. And when faced with that position, then I can say quite clearly and quite openly that our trade union will be placed in a position where we will defy the law, and we will stand by workers who find themselves in that position. That's where the Tories have taken us to. The other thing that needs to happen, and I'll finish on this, because I'm glad we've got somebody from the People's Assembly here. The other thing that needs to happen here is that we need to break out of our shell. I look round about the audience, and hopefully there are people here who either aren't involved in unions or who are union members but not particularly active in terms of being, stewards, etc. But let's be frank and honest about it. The vast majority of people that I'm looking at for up here are folk who are already very active. They're shop stewards, they're conveners, they're on committees, they're well versed in what this law says, and they're well versed in what this law entails. We need to stop actually talking to ourselves. We need to start talking to the general public. And we need to start talking to them in terms that they understand and relates to them. So we need to be explaining what the link is between this attack on the trade union movement is and what that wider austerity agenda and the attack on them in terms of their services, their housing, their earnings, their benefits, what the link is between those two. And we need to begin to build that kind of movement, which is not just about trade unions lobbying people in Parliament, important as that is, but actually turns us into protest up and down the country, involving people in communities. Because ironically, there might actually be a plus to all of this. Because it should force us to do something that we haven't been particularly good at up to this point. And that's to explain to the general public what trade unions are, who trade unions are, because we know that it's not just about union officials. We know that in the main, the trade union movement is ordinary people who voluntarily give up their time and effort to represent their fellow workers. And we need to explain what trade unions do. So we should be using this as an opportunity to organise and to build the movement. So we need to spread out and reach out to a wider group of people. So we do need to educate folk about what the Tories are up to. We need to educate them about what about what the unions do. We need to agitate against the bill, and above all, we need to organise. And yes, have meetings like this. I'm pleased it's happening, but we need to begin to organise at the workplace and out there on the streets, talking to ordinary people, warning them about what this bill is about and its fundamental attack on human rights and civil liberties.
Thanks very much, Jackson. I think Jackson has indeed stripped the arguments bare of this bill. And just some of the points he was making about we've got to move out of our shell, as you put it, and certainly we've tried to put labour movement policies into the local community, the local trade unions, and we've got Leslie, I believe, from the Clydebank Post.
Yes, hello.
So the Clydebank Post, for instance, has given us very good coverage. So it's not often I think you pick up a local paper and you have such coverage of what the trade union movement is doing in a particular locality. So we're certainly trying a bit down here, Jackson, to get the message out into the wider community. This meeting, I think, links in with the last one we had in September, where it was an anti-austerity meeting. And as you'll see from our motion, we talk here about the organised working class through the trade union movement. Represents the single biggest obstacle to the Tories' political project of austerity, and indeed it does, and that's as Jackson said. That's why they're bringing this attack on organised labour. Jackson also mentioned about building coalitions, and our next speaker is from the People's Assembly. The People's Assembly is the organisation that tries to bring together the trade union movement in the communities, and trades councils play a large part in that. And we've got the Clydebank Trade Union Council represented here. So